This is essentially a video I prepared to make for a really long time, and this video signifies the change in my spiritual practice. I will film today a video about Cernunos, or Cernon, the Celtic horned god. This is a really interesting spirit to film a video on for multiple reasons. Cernunos is essentially a spirit a lot of people work with, but there is not a lot of verifiable historical evidence regarding Cernunos, and first I will talk about who Cernunos is in modern neo-paganism and how to summon him, and then we will talk about more historic aspects of Cernunos and actually the problem in the neo-pagan community. But let's talk about Cernunos first. So Cernunos is a god of the wild, of sorcery, of trickery, of shape-shifting, of fertility, and of wealth. He is the aspect of the horned god current. So Slavic god Veles, Cernunos, and many other horned gods in a history of Europe and beyond are essentially the part of the same horned god current. And that current is essentially the current of fertility, power, underworld, sexuality, magic, trickery, and those other things associated with the horned gods. Cernunos specifically is really popular in modern neo-paganism because when modern neo-pagans say word the horned god, they essentially mean Cernunos, because modern neo-pagan revival is neo-Celtic revival. So Cernunos as a Celtic deity is essentially the horned god of the modern neo-paganism, and he is the most venerated spirit, one of the most venerated spirits in the modern neo-paganism in Europe. Now, we need to observe Cernunos from what we know from historical sources, and that's not a lot. And what we know about him is pretty, I won't say dark, but it's pretty unclear and it's pretty mysterious. We know that he was associated with the wild and with animals, and we also know that he is associated with sorcery and with rites. However, we do not know any specific sacrifices to his cult. We don't have any preserved rituals to Cernunos specifically. So, outside of the name of Cernunos, all of the rites we have in a modern neo-paganism dedicated to Cernunos are essentially reconstructions. There is no any preserved notion of a rite to Cernunos which is preserved in a form we have been able to reproduce and perform. We don't have anything which is resembling a living folk tradition dedicated to Cernunos, or for example something like a Greco-Egyptian magical papyri, which is a document you have about rituals to certain gods of Greco-Egyptian pantheon. There is nothing of that kind dedicated to Cernunos. So anything I give you is my own personal gnosis and my own attempt to reconstruct this work with one particular entity known as Cernunos according to my own ability. So this ritual will start with, as all of my rituals do, raising of the sacred space. So you should draw a circle around yourself. You should visualize light green orb burning with green fire and radiating light green light which penetrates into the edge of the circle until you can literally feel light green energy radiating from the edges. Now, there is one aspect of this visualization and meditation which I elaborate every time with all of its variants presented on this channel. And what I want to talk about is when you do this form of meditation, you really need to visualize and to focus until you feel a physical sensation radiating energy from the edges of your circle. Don't keep it just visual, don't keep it just conceptual. You need to do it and you need to really dedicate yourself to it to the point you see a physical sensation from this specific meditation. Now, a lot of people, when I say them something like this, they tell me, it's difficult to focus, it's not just in my head, how can I know this, blah blah blah. What they need to understand is this. We are working with the unseen energy here. And if you want to move unseen energy, which definitely exists because we have indirect evidence of its existence, we need to essentially work with our thoughts, but also with certain implements. There are other more complex ways of contacting Cernunos than what I'm going to give, but I will give the simplest methods like this for beginning, and then we will in the future give more complex methodologies. So you really need to focus a lot on this raising of the sacred space until you feel that energy radiating from the edges of the space. Now, from the sake of convenience, the best place to do it is woods and somewhere in nature, preferably where you have a lot of grass. So, depending on which aspect of Cernunos you want to contact, the phases of the moon are full moon and the black moon. If you want to contact him on a full moon, you call more fertility related aspect of him. If you want to contact him on a more destructive side, you do it on a dark moon or a black moon, right? The night where there is no moon in the sky. So preferably, so now his day of a week, that's a pretty tricky subject because essentially Cernunos is mythological equivalent of Veles, and Veles is essentially god of the earth in Slavic mythology. So Cernunos should correspond mostly to the earth, and out of the 7 planets, I honestly don't know where to put him right now. His planetary association will be channeled and covered, but right now I don't have accurate information. I am still trying to reconstruct work with this deity. So, in this clip you will receive a magical chant for calling him and raising of the sacred space. Now, once you adequately rouse the sacred space, you should start reciting the chant Cernunos, Cernunos, Divos, Divos. Cernunos, Cernunos, Divos, Divos. That's the magical chant for calling him up. Now, in order for this to work, you need to have astral senses opened. And the best way to do it, in my personal opinion, is to perform some of the other exercises presented on this channel in other videos. If you really want to open astral senses with Cernunos current specifically, what I advise is to do rising of the sacred space every day without recitation of the chant, until you are able to consistently raise the sacred space to the point of feeling energy and being able to work with that. Once it happens, I recommend then starting to use the chant and working with Cernunos. Now, the question is how you feel the presence of Cernunos. You see, the thing is, a lot of people have unrealistic expectations of spirit work. In the beginning, you will not see anything physically in a sense. You will feel pressure in the room, a weird tingling sensations, feeling that somebody is watching you really intensely, feeling that you are not alone. You will have occasional knocking on the wall, things like that. So, during your first contact with Cernunos, rise the sacred space and then recite the chant until you feel definite shift in the room and alteration. That means that deity came. Now, what kind of offerings Cernunos likes? I asked him in my ritual. I asked him in my rituals that, and he told me to give him anything related to the deer. Wine is okay. Any form of natural juice is okay. Fruits are okay. Meat is okay. And any form of green candles is okay. About setting altar to Cernunos, my advice is to buy a deer's head and then use two green candles. So deer's head and two green candles. Deer's head to serve as a representation of the horned god, and then two candles at each side of the deer's head to represent the gateway. Then you call Cernunos up, and he will indeed come. You call him through the methods provided here, and then when he comes, tell him to consecrate the altar and dedicate it to him. So that's how you have an altar for him, essentially. Now, there are other aspects of work with Cernunos I want to discuss here. And that's the fact that people kinda don't want to go out of their comfort zones when they work with deities. You see, magic is a unique in a sense that you can do pretty controversial things with magic and get away with it because you do it on energetic level. So let's say I have an enemy and I want to punish an enemy. If I am not a magician, I need to go and beat him up physically, which risks me getting arrested. But if I am a magician, I can cast a curse and get my vengeance. Or let's say I won a race, and if I am not a magician, I need to go to my boss and coerce him verbally to give me a raise. But if I am a magician, I can cast a money spell and get that same raise without risks associated with it. So, what people try to do with Cernunos is they try to put him in some form of a weird cluster where he is somehow, I don't know, some form of a peace and love deity corresponding to the hippie movement and large consumptions of weed. And it is true that we don't have a lot of archaeological evidence for Cernunos himself. Actually, outside of his name and his depiction, we don't know a lot about him. What we know is that Cernunos technically means the horned one. Cern comes from the same word as horn, and it's technically more of a title than a name. We don't even know what was the actual name of the spirit. But what we generally know about Celtic worship is that Celtic worship was animistic worship of natural forces. And that animistic worship of natural forces, according to the archaeological data, involved animal and human sacrifice. Now, I am not advocating that you should indeed perform animal and human sacrifice. that's something you should decide according to the laws of the land you live in and your own moral compass, but the spirit in question will definitely not have anything against animal sacrifice, for example. If you think about it, Cernunos was a god in agricultural society with a lot of pastoralists, and those pastoralists indeed sacrificed their own cattle in return for favors from the deity. So, one way you can do it in modern times is you can perform rituals in which you dedicate animals to Cernunos without actually slaughtering them, because we live in cities, and as you already know, we cannot slaughter sheep or deers in cities. That's not possible. So we can adapt our sacrificial rites to our urban setting without stop doing them, because essentially if you summon Cernunos and you dedicate to him a soul spiritual energy of the sheep or spiritual energy of the deer, and Cernunos as astral entity comes and takes the spiritual energy from the sheep or the deer as his animal dedicated to him, it will not have as strong as effect as if you slaughter the animal, but it will still count as a sacrifice. It will count as a sacrificial rite. So this series on Cernunos will mostly be dedicated towards adapting worship of the horned deity to the modern age, but also coming into nature and sacrificing animals occasionally or leaving fruit offerings will greatly benefit your relationship with him. Some of the things you can do when you work with Cernunos, you can ask him for, is magic, glamour, health, vitality, being more able to attract sexual partner, spiritual wisdom, protection, destruction of enemies, astral shape-shifting, well-being of animals and plants, investigation of the astral worlds, therionic possession, working with animal spirits, knowledge of the plants, soul travel, and many, many more. Cernunos is really versatile spirit, a versatile deity, and what I listed is simply a small portion of what he can do. Because essentially when we talk about Cernunos, we are not necessarily talking about one limited entity, we are talking about energy current, which manifested through different European and non-European pantheons as different spirits, as different gods, and Cernunos is part of that current. He is part of that force. And we should respect him as a part of something much bigger, as a part of something much more ancient. And one of the key things I advise to my audience is to leave spirits to manifest to themselves in a way they see fit. And the last thing I need to say is this: what should be the first request given to Cernunos? And what should be the first thing you ask of him, and how you should give him a license to depart? Well, the thing is, the first thing you ask of him when you summon him shouldn't be any favor. You should simply ask him to work with you, and you should introduce yourself and tell him how long you want to work with him and how long you want to walk alongside him. Because the thing about Cernunos is you cannot command him in a way you can do other spirits from the Goetia, because we don't know appropriate hierarchy for the Celtic pantheon, so we don't know what is the way we can command the gods. We don't have a method. And because we don't have a method, we will not risk commanding such a powerful being. So the best way to approach him for the first rite is just leave to him some of the offerings from the list I mentioned in this clip. Once he comes, and tell him that you want to work with him or alongside him. And once you get to know him, once you start working with him, then you should indeed ask him for certain favors and ask him to teach you magic and sorcery. Now, what you should also do is, once you conclude your ritual, don't aggressively tell him to leave. Instead, what you should do is you should tell him to leave in a really respectful manner. Leave offerings for him and close the rite by raising the sacred space once again. Let Cernunos stay as much as he wants and expand his energy through the space. So that's the conclusion of this video. The chant will be in the title of the clip, and I hope you enjoyed it.